you join me in welcoming our next guest speaker, Eli Bremer. I've known Eli for a number of years, great individual. You know, I enjoy his friendship, his camaraderie, and, you know, he helped me out on my campaign. But I tell you, here's a little bit about Eli. Eli Bremer represented the United States at the 2008 Olympic Games in the sport of pentathlon. Additionally, he won the bronze medal at the 2008 World Cup final, the most prestigious medal by an American pentathlete since 1979. A two-time Pan American champion and Pan American Games gold medalist. Eli has been ranked as high as number 2 in the world. He also had one of the longest careers by any U.S. pentathlete, qualifying for an unprecedented 12 world teams. Eli is a local. He graduated from the U.S. Air Force Academy with a BS in economics. He earned an MPS from George Washington University and an MBA from the University of Colorado at Colorado Springs. Beyond that, Eli is extremely involved in a number of things here locally. Outside sports, he's a businessman and a serial entrepreneur. He founded the Pure Performance team, which has grown to over 80 Olympians and 60-plus Olympic medals and become one of the largest Olympic sponsorship programs in history. This innovative sponsorship model has put millions of dollars in support of Olympians through aggregating micro-sponsorships and syndicating groups of athletes for sponsors. In 2012, Eli co-founded SoCon Media, which patented a video messaging platform for business and healthcare communication. He also founded AFA Creations, which produces and sells artwork by famed Colorado native aviation artist Rick Broom. He also advises a number of Colorado-based startups, both formally and informally, on business and capital structures. During his time in the Air Force, Eli managed high-dollar space system contracts at Schriever Air Force Base and Peterson Air Force Base. He worked with the military buyers and private contractors to ensure the best service was provided to support national defense. Eli separated from the Air Force Reserves as a major. Publicity. During the Beijing Olympics, Eli became well known for his nationally syndicated blog. He was published widely through a number of sites, most notably as one of the top athlete writers for the USA Today. His blog was read by millions of people every day during the Olympics. Eli was featured in National Geographic's global firm, The Incredible Human Machine, alongside Aerosmith and the Blue Angels. Eli worked for NBC during the Summer Olympics as a color commentator and was the second youngest on-air talent at the Athens Olympics. He's a frequent guest on Colorado Springs radio and TV stations, being interviewed on a variety of topics. Eli is an accomplished training and motivational speaker, conducting on average 50 appearances in the US, Canada, Mexico, Japan, Taiwan, and China, so we're all pretty lucky to have him here with us today. He has headlined 10 conferences in China with an excess of over 10,000 attendees and is proficient in speaking through translation. Eli mentors and trains athletes and other professionals on how to improve their speaking and presentation skills. Eli serves as an advisor on several presidential campaigns and advises a number of federal office holders on Olympic policy. In 2008, Eli was selected as a finalist for the White House Fellows Program, the leading leadership training fellowship in the United States. Despite this, he is often better known for his uncle, Ambassador L. Some of us remember that, Ambassador L. Paul Bremer, the head of Reconstruction in Iraq from 2003 to 2004. Eli, his wife Cami, and their 3-year-old son Struthers live in Colorado Springs, and I know them well. Great family. Cami and Struthers' lives were saved by world-class medical providers at UC Health in Denver when Cami's pregnancy took a difficult turn. This led to Struthers being delivered at 1.5 pounds and spending 105 days in the hospital. Today, Cami and Struthers are doing very well, and Cami publicly shares her story to encourage and support other women who go through the same struggle she endured. Please join me in welcoming Eli to us this morning.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. All right, where's the... All right, test. Are you guys able to hear me? Is this coming through here? All right. I'm going to try to throw my PowerPoint in here. Thank you, Steve, for that introduction. Let me see.
Leave that one.
Is that one in? Is there another one?
Right there.
Give me 1 second. We're going to get this loaded up here. Super high tech. This is a PC. I'm a Mac guy. Would you mind? It's got music. Okay, and is this one right here? Is that opening up?
Yep.
There we are. Okay, where's my slideshow?
Right up there.
Is it that one?
Right there.
All right. Well, good morning. Good morning. Welcome to Colorado Springs. This is the home of the Olympic movement in the United States. I'm sure most of you guys have been here before, but Steve contacted me a couple weeks ago and said, hey, got a group of our assessors coming to town, and this is Olympic City, USA. It's something I'm really proud of being here in Colorado Springs. Could you come in and share with them why this is a significant thing for Colorado? And I'm an Olympic junkie, growing up wanting to be around the Olympics my whole life, and so, this is like being a kid in a candy shop. You get to go tell people why the Olympics are so great. Is this working better? Yes. Okay. Just drop that one. Any of you been to the Olympic Training Center here before? A couple of you. It's a great opportunity. If you don't have a chance while you're here, come back, come visit us. We're opening the Olympic Museum as well. I'll start with a little bit of background about the Olympics. The Olympics are really an amazing operation. They were founded in 1896 by a Frenchman named Baron Pierre de Coubertin, and he started them in Athens, Greece, tipping his hat to the ancient Olympics, and he wanted to bring the world together in peaceful gathering for sport. At the time, it was really nothing more than like a gaggle, though. I mean, they did things like tug of rope, things like that. It wasn't a highly serious athletic competition. But it started growing up, and the founder of the Olympics actually had a big impact on me in my sport, because in 1904, he decided he wanted to create a sport that would showcase all of the types of athleticism. The ancient Greeks had an ancient pentathlon, and he wanted to create a modern pentathlon that would sort of be the all-around, most diverse and versatile athlete. So he looked back at the Napoleonic Wars and thought, what would be the skills required for a Napoleonic courier? And he thought, okay, you're taking a message from the front lines of battle and you're riding it back to headquarters. So you got to get on a horse and you leave the battlefield. The enemy shoots your horse out from underneath you. Bad luck for the horse. But you have to shoot your way out of that ambush of enemy soldiers. You proceed on foot, so you got to run. You cross a river. Your gun's now useless. Your gunpowder's wet. You're back on your native soil, but there's some thieves that jump you and try to rob you. So you have to pull out your sword and fence your way out of it. It's kind of a far-fetched story, but he's French, so, So those were the skills of the modern pentathlon. And in 1904, my sport joined the Olympics. And in fact, until 1956, you had to be a military officer to do pentathlon in the Olympics. Our most famous story is in 1912, a young West Point grad named George was selected after graduating West Point to go to the Olympics in the sport of pentathlon. And George is a very talented, albeit somewhat cocky young man. Very good at the sport of shooting. And he was expected to and probably would have won a medal except for a problem that happened in shooting. During one of the rounds of shooting, he was supposed to shoot 5 shots. They went downrange and they saw 4 10s on the target and no 5th shot. And George said, he told the judges, he said, I'm sure I shot a 5th shot. It probably went through one of the other holes in the 10 ring. Well, the problem is they actually, in the time, they would put a second screen or a second target behind the first specifically to check on that because each bullet would have a slightly different trajectory. The judges looked, they only saw 4 shots on the second screen. So it was ruled that he had not loaded the 5th shot in the gun. Well, that cocky young lieutenant learned a lot of lessons from sports. And George would grow up to become General George S. Patton, the famous general of World War II. Learned a lot of the lessons from that he took in the military from his career in sports in the Olympics and in my sport of pentathlon. So he remains the all-time most famous athlete in my sport. The Olympics have grown up a lot, though, since the early days. It's now a massive endeavor. In fact, it's so big, every time that the summer opening ceremonies are held, the Summer Olympic Games opening ceremonies are held, they're the largest event, a peacetime event, in the history of human civilization. Think about that, the largest peacetime event. They're that big. Fully 1 in every 4 people on the planet will tune in the opening ceremonies of the Summer Olympics. Nearly every country participates. That's how big it is. And so that's the scope of what we are honored to represent here in Colorado and in Colorado Springs. And the Olympics are different from other pro sports in a variety of ways. And they are professional now. A lot of people talk about it as amateur. It really is a professional sports operation. if you think about it, people cheer for professional sports, for other professional sports differently. Based on typically your regions, you've got these tribes of people that are cheering for things. You know, if you're in LA, you have one team. I mean, think about it. We're from Colorado, right? So we've got our pro sport teams. We've got the Avalanche, we got the Rockies, we got the Nuggets. We even used to have a professional football team. Sorry, I just had to say it. And maybe we will again someday. But what's different about the Olympics is it brings a nation together. It's a time when you may cheer for the Patriots, God bless you, or the Broncos. I'm sorry about that this year. But we all come together, and in 2 months, when the opening ceremonies are for the Winter Olympics, Patriots and Broncos fans will agree on one thing, and that's that we cheer for Team USA. And that's the power of this, and it's not just in the US. I've seen the power of this globally as well. So that's really the aura of what the Olympics are. They're a massive global operation. And again, I wanted you to get a sense of the pride that we in Colorado are the host of America's team. This is where people come to train, here in Colorado Springs, all around the state. Anybody here from Routt County? Right over there. I was just in Steamboat, right? I was just up in Steamboat a couple days ago, and they were talking about all the Olympians that train up there. It was front page of the paper. This really is all the way through Colorado. We actually only have one blemish on our Olympic record, which was in 1976, turning down the Winter Olympics when they were offered to us. So we're still doing penance for that internationally. But overall, Colorado is not just the seed of U.S. Olympics, but we have athletes come from all over the globe to come train here in Colorado Springs and in our mountains in Colorado. So it's really an honor to have that be the case. So with that grandiose stage set, I want to boil it down to the granular level. And I'm going to share with you the story of how I, as a Colorado native, found my way into the Olympics. Because the Olympics are these big stories, and they're these grand stories, but oftentimes the personal side of it is lost when you're watching it on TV. And so as I was thinking about this, what I wanted to share with you and what maybe you can take with you when you're watching the Olympics in a couple months, the next Winter Olympics, is the idea of the personal stories and what actually goes into the production and the growth of an Olympic athlete. So my Olympic story started when I was 4 years old. And it started here in Colorado Springs at the airport, just east of town. My parents had moved out here from Connecticut, where both my parents' lived, and it was the summertime. They moved out maybe a year earlier. My dad took a job here in Colorado Springs, and my mom was flying me out to go see my brothers who had been staying with my grandparents for the summer. So we walk onto the airplane, and I'm walking down the aisle, and our seats are to the right, and they're 3 across. And when we get to our seat, there's a gentleman sitting in the window seat. And I'm sure he was super stoked to discover that he got to sit next to a 4-year-old for the entire flight. But he was extremely nice. And he was wearing a strange outfit. And he told me that was a sports, like a warm-up outfit. And it was a uniform. And I asked him about that. And he said, I just competed in the Olympic Festival. Do any of you remember the Olympic festivals? We held a number of them here in Colorado. They're like little mini Olympics. Yeah, we got someone in the back. Like little mini Olympics that were designed to be like national championships and to get athletes ready to compete in the Olympics. And this gentleman had just finished competing in the U.S. Olympic Festival. And he spent probably an hour talking to me about his career. It turns out he was a shooter. He was a rifle shooter. And he had just finished competing. He had won 2 medals in the Olympic Festival. And he pulled those medals out and he showed them to me. And I just was enamored with it. It was the first time I'd ever seen a medal. And he said, when you do a sports competition and you win, you get a medal. Now, I know in today's kids, like they'd be like, you have to win to get a medal? Yeah. But it was a different era. So, and I was 4, and actually I wanted him to give me the medals, but he didn't. But he gave me something else. Outside of giving me a dream, he gave me a hat, a baseball cap. And you look in this photo, that's my grandfather who passed away last year, my older 2 brothers. And that was right after I got off that flight at their house in Connecticut. And it was Levi's had sponsored the Olympic Festival, and so it's the Levi's logo blended in with the Olympic Festival logo. And he gave me that hat, and I wore that hat for at least the next year. You know how most like 4-year-old kids, they've got their security blanket or their teddy bear? I had my hat. And I honestly have no idea what happened to that hat. Got a lot of photos of me in it. It gets nastier and nastier over time. You can kind of progress it. It's like archaeology. You can kind of dig the layers of dirt off. I was, a boy, and I played around in the dirt. So I think what happened, I'm pretty sure at some point of its own volition, it crawled its way over and jumped into a trash can. But I wore that hat constantly for well over a year. And I remember thinking, I'm not sure what these Olympic things are. It's some sports deal, and it's super cool. Well, it was about 2 years later that the Olympics came back to Los Angeles. And this was a really big deal because in 1980, the U.S. had boycotted the Olympics in Moscow. So we had the boycott Olympics in Moscow. And this was the first time during my life that the U.S. was competing in the Olympics. I wouldn't have remembered 1980 anyway. I was too young. But there was a lot of hoopla about the Olympics coming to America and about it being on American soil. And it was really exciting to me because I'd met this athlete earlier, so I had a concept the Olympics are some really awesome show. But we had a problem. My parents lived on a small ranch just north of the Air Force Academy. At the time, it was the middle of nowhere. Now it's somewhere between the south side of Denver and the north side of Colorado Springs, which are rapidly becoming the same thing. But at the time, it was the middle of nowhere. And we had horses and sheep and chickens and ducks and a stream that ran through the property, but we didn't have a color TV. In fact, we had this little dinky black and white TV that barely worked. So in order for us to watch the Olympics, we had to go over to a friend's house who had this color TV thing. So I was super excited about that. And we went over to our friend the Seeley's house, and we watched the nightly broadcast. And I remember the first thing I remember ever seeing on the Olympics was Mary Lou Retton winning the gold medal in 1984. Anybody else remember that? It's just an amazing, amazing event. I was 6 at the time. So I was starting to understand how significant that was. And everybody's going berserk. And I watched her and I thought, that's what I want to be when I grow up. I'm not a women's gymnast necessarily, but I want to be an Olympian. I really, really, really want to be an Olympian. I want to wear our national colors. I want to grow up and be an Olympian. I was 6 years old, and that's when I had the dream of first going to the Olympics. And Mary Lou Retton became my hero from that point forward. And incidentally, I got a chance to meet her 23 years later, and I was utterly shocked because I was like, dude, you're short. I remember looking up to her. I never remember looking down on her. We were working an event here at the Olympic Training Center, walked in, saw her. I had the chance to chat with her for quite a while. And I said, Mary Lou, you're not going to believe this. Maybe you will, because I'm sure I'm not the only one. But you inspired me to get involved with the Olympics. And she said, really, what about it? And I told her about, it was the first time I'd seen color TV, and I saw you in this amazing outfit. You must have loved that outfit. And she said, no, I thought it was horrible. It was super gaudy. Oh, okay. So over time, I actually learned the same thing. At a certain point, you wanted a little more subdued outfit. So in 1984, I had the opportunity to get inspired, and I wanted to become an Olympian. Okay, well, but if you want to become an Olympian, you have to do a sport, right? I mean, it just kind of makes sense. So I was the youngest of 3 boys, which didn't give me a lot of options. We grew up riding horses. We grew up going to 4-H and things like that. More activities than true competition. My mom wound up getting injured during that time and started taking up swimming in order to rehab her leg. So my older brothers were considered very athletic, and they decided they wanted to swim, so they joined the swim team. Well, just because I'm the youngest doesn't mean I can't do what my older brothers can do. So I decided to join the swim team. So as it turns out, though, when you go up to the swim team and you say, I want to join, and they say, okay, jump in and swim across the pool, and you say, I need to stay in the shallow end where my feet touch. It doesn't really impress anyone. So they politely declined and said, you need to go get some swim lessons. So that's fine. I went off, took a bunch of swim lessons, twice, because I failed them every time. Came back, and I'm ready to go, and I tried out again. I'm like, I want to be an Olympian, so I'm going to join the swim team, I'm going to go to the Olympics. And they said no, again, much to their credit, to be honest with you, because I still was a lousy swimmer. So undeterred, I'm a determined little kid, so I go off. My parents get me in some more swim lessons, and I take some more swim lessons. A couple months later, I tried out, and on my third attempt, I was finally accepted as a proud member of the Air Force Academy Falcon swim team. All right, now, to put this in perspective here, these are the mighty Falcons, okay? Air Force Academy youth swim team, and it's as corny as this. It's the Air Force Falcons, and you combine a falcon with a dolphin, and you get a falcon, okay? It took me 3 attempts to get on this team. That was my illustrious start to the Olympics. I'm up in the upper left-hand corner with my 2 brothers there, and I was just so excited. And I remember the first day, it was 1986. It was the first day that I got on the swim team. And I remember I was the slowest swimmer in the slowest lane on the Falcons, which were the slowest team in town. And I was so happy because I was pursuing my dream, and I thought this was amazing. And to be fair, it didn't take long for me to make a name for myself. It wasn't a good name, though. I set the team record for how much water you could displace from the pool while swimming, and I was called the Mad Thrasher. It was not a compliment. So anyway, that was really the start of my pursuit of the Olympics, albeit at a very humble level right here at the Air Force Academy. But I stuck with it, and the next time I ran into the Olympics was in 1992, when the little Falcon swim team was in the right place at the right time, and an athlete named Ron Carno came out to the Olympic Training Center. He had a requirement, I think, to do some sort of sponsor appearance, and so he dropped in to the swim team, to the Falcon swim team. There were about 15 or 20 of us there. I mean, we're a tiny little swim team. And Ron came in and talked to us, and he's this big guy, and I think it was a 400 IMer, if I remember right. And he told us about his going to the Olympics in Barcelona, Spain. And I couldn't believe that such a great person was taking the time to come to my swim team. Oh, where's my other? I thought I had another photo in between these two. But he gave me an autograph that I kept on my wall for years to come. And I was so excited to get to watch the Olympics that year because Ron Carno was there, and he had come and talked to my team and shaken my hand. I was watching the opening ceremonies in 1992 Barcelona when all of a sudden the broadcast started talking about an accident that had happened. And as it turned out, Ron Carno's dad had died during the opening ceremonies. You might remember that. He was the athlete whose dad died while watching the opening ceremonies. And I just felt heartbroken for the poor guy because he was at my swim team. And, he was my hero. And everybody thought he was going to pull out of the competition. He did swim. He didn't do very well, didn't medal there. But it was one of the most amazing stories of the Olympics, how he persevered. And he said, my family got me here, and I'm going to keep swimming. So that inspired me greatly. It inspired me that he had that perseverance, and he wanted to motivate it. And he believed it was these kids that were watching him, that he had gone and talk to them, my team, many others like it. He owed it to them to continue on the track. And so that was my memory of the 1992 Olympics. Well, it was shortly after that my mom was swimming at the Air Force Academy. And she met a couple there, Alan and Kim Arata. And they were swimming in the pool, very good swimmers. She started talking to them. And as it turns out, Alan was the rifle coach at the Air Force Academy. And she said, what's up with this? You're a rifle coach, but you're a really good swimmer. And he said, yeah, my wife and I did this sport called the pentathlon. And shooting's one of the sports. And she asked what it was, and he said shooting, fencing, swimming, horseback riding, and running. And my mom, like all moms, decided that her kids would be amazing at this. Because they're her kids. She said, well, my kids are on a swim team, and they grew up riding horses, and they hunt. They'll be like saying, I watch skiing on TV, I can do the moguls. So I, at this point, realized how crazy that was. But Alan and Kim said, hey, we'll talk to them. And so they met with my brothers and I, and they said, yeah, there's a couple good prospects here, and then there's Eli. And so they got my brothers into sort of a low-level competition, and I got to tag along because I'm the youngest one. And to my credit, I did win the first pentathlon I'd ever went into, probably largely because I was the only one in my age group. So that was my start of my illustrious pentathlon career. And if any of you are the youngest child, you know how this grows as a kid. You know, you're always influenced by your older brothers. Well, my older brothers were 4 and 5 years older than me, and they're getting ready for college at the time. So they wound up leaving swimming. They weren't going to be recruited athletes or anything, and so they decided, we're just going to quit. We're going to go on and do paid work and get ourselves set up for college. I was the least athletic, but I enjoyed it, and I was like, hey, I still enjoy swimming, and so I stayed on the swim team. And I had this dream, this fantasy it was really a fantasy more of going to the Olympics. And when I was 14 years old, my parents pulled me aside one day in the kitchen, and they said, Eli, we need to talk. And I said, yeah, what? And they said, your brothers have quit swimming. We're driving you to swim 3 times a week. It's kind of a financial hardship on us. You're doing other stuff that you're really better at. You're better at piano, and you're better at everything except for swimming. So they'll tell you this is a true conversation. So they said, we think you should quit swimming. And I wasn't devastated. I knew I didn't have a lot of talent. This is the next photo here. That's a picture of me around that time. Clearly does not look like an aspiring young Olympic athlete. I'd been on the swim team for 6 years. Never made a state team. Usually people would make states 2 to 3 years in. But I just loved what I did. I liked riding horses too, but I loved swimming. And I came back and I talked to my parents and I said, look, I understand where our family is financially on this. I understand where we are in timing. Can we make a trade? I'll quit piano, I'll quit everything else I do, and I want to lean into this and up the amount of times I'm swimming. My parents sort of reluctantly agreed. And they said, okay, we disagree with you. We don't think this is something you have a lot of talent in, but it's your passion, and we're going to let you follow it. So I stopped doing virtually everything else, and I started swimming, first 5 times a week. And then my parents were mortified the day I walked in the door and said, my coach has announced that he's going to start morning practices at 5 a.m. And I didn't have a driver's license because I was 14. So practice started at 5. I got up at 4:27 every morning. And my dad said, Eli, here's the deal. This is all on you. You have to wake me up every day. I'm never setting my alarm. I'll drive you to practice, but any day you don't want to go, don't wake me up. So I never missed a practice in probably 2 years. Started swimming every morning, every afternoon, and Saturdays, 11 practices a week. It started consuming my life. That was, sorry about that. I got really dry. Can I get another water when you get a chance? It was 16 degrees out this morning. It sucked all the humidity out. That was how I sort of entered into my 15 and 16-year-old age group. Thank you so much. And then things started changing for me quite a bit. By the time I got to high school, I'd also picked up running, because I knew I wanted to pursue that sport, pentathlon, that my brothers had tried. And so I started running more, swimming more, and I grew up in 1 year 6 inches and lost over 25 pounds. And all of a sudden, the fat kid that everybody thought was going to be a pianist suddenly started doing sports really well. And swimming 11 times a week doesn't hurt either. By the time I graduated from high school, I've been swimming for 10 years. It was my senior year of high school. The last race I did in Colorado Springs was the city championship meet. And I went in, it was May of 1996. And I joined the swim team 10 years earlier. And I walked into that swim meet, and I was the guy at the pool that day. No one had beaten me in a year. I walked in knowing that I was probably going to break the city record in every event I swam in. I'd gone from being the slowest swimmer in the slowest lane on the slowest team in town to that day I rewrote the city record books, all 4 records. So that wasn't what was important that day. I remember walking into the pool and looking around and thinking about this, and thinking that was 10 years earlier, and none of the people that were in that photo, none of the people that were around when I started were there that day. In 10 years, going from the bottom to the top, I didn't pass anybody. I just outlasted them. And it makes a big difference. And you know what? That's not a bad thing. And I remember thinking that before I rewrote the city record books and became one of the best swimmers we've ever had here. There's a lot to be said for that. Sometimes success is just a matter of outlasting people. So that was the end of my high school career. I was a Division I recruit in both swimming and track and field 3 short years after my parents had counseled me to stop sports. So a lot had changed in that time. But I grew up next to the Air Force Academy, like I said, and I had a dream and a vision to go to the Air Force Academy too. 2 goals I had in my life: go to the Olympics, go to the Air Force Academy. No particular order. And in the fall of 1995, I had a chance to go to the office opening of Senator Ben Nighthorse Campbell. I'm sure many of you remember him. And long-serving senator here in Colorado, came from the Western Slope, and I had a chance to go meet him. And I wore an Olympic Festival jacket, same jacket that the athlete who on the airplane had worn. I'd gone to the last Olympic Festival, which was held in 1995 in Denver. It was the last one that was ever held. So I wore that at this office opening. And Senator Campbell saw that, came over and started talking to me, and he said, I don't know if you know this about me, Eli, but I went to the 1964 Olympics in judo. Everybody know that? Senator Campbell went to the Olympics in judo. He was the last person to serve in the Senate that went to the Olympics. And anyway, so he said, he asked, if I'd competed in the Olympic Festival, and I told him, my dream someday is doing what you've done of going to the Olympics. Well, I applied to the Air Force Academy, didn't get the congressman's nomination, didn't get the first senator's nomination, but I wound up getting Senator Campbell's nomination. And so it was because of a fellow, what would eventually become a fellow Olympian, Ben Campbell. There's the Ron Carnew postcard. So he gave that to me, and you can see the hole in the top. That was on my wall for probably about 8 years. So significant to me. But this is my freshman year at the Air Force Academy. Senator Campbell came to go visit. And this has been a very special relationship to me because Ben has become a close personal friend. And last time I saw him was a couple months ago. We were flying out to Washington, D.C. together. And he shared with me that the next Olympics are in Tokyo, which is where he competed in the Olympics in judo. And he said, I'm going out with the last of my teammates who are still alive. And he said, we're a bunch of old farts, but we're going to go watch the Olympics in Tokyo together. So it was because of him that I went to the Air Force Academy. Went to the academy, swam there for 2 years, fenced there for 2 years, and then graduated in the summer of 2000. And it was after graduation that you get 60 days of leave. So I took off with a couple of my classmates. We hopped on a military jet, flew over to Europe, and then we flew back to the U.S. about 4 weeks later. We got stranded in Washington, D.C. And my uncle lives in Washington, D.C., so we called him up and said, hey, can we come crash at your place? So we were there at the 4th of July in 2000, talking to my uncle one day at breakfast. He said, Eli, what are you planning on doing for the rest of the summer before you start work? And I said, well, I've got this voucher from Delta when they bumped me on a flight earlier this year. It's $500. I'm hoping that's enough to get me down to watch the Olympics in Sydney because I want to go to the Athens Olympics. And I want to watch them first so that it kind of loses its luster and I'm going to be making a real push at this. Well, I went home, and a couple weeks later, I got a phone call from my uncle, and he said, Eli, I think you should go watch the Olympics in Sydney. And so I've called my secretary and told her to book you a flight to go watch the Olympics. And I was like, oh my gosh, because at this point I'd given up on it. I realized $500 is a drop in the bucket to go to watch an Olympics. So he bought me the ticket to the Olympics. My middle brother was working in Amsterdam at the time doing technology startups, doing very well. And when he heard I was going to the Olympics, he said, I'm going too. So my middle brother bought a ticket. We jumped on an airplane together and flew down to Sydney. And this was, I met a number of athletes now, but I'd never seen the Olympics before. In fact, I'd missed the 1996 Olympics because I was at basic training at the Air Force Academy. And I remember my brother and I did our research, and we decided we were going to go watch cycling first. And the reason was, it's a long course, and therefore it's free. And free is good because the Olympics are really, really expensive. So we go out there, and we wait, and we find our way in there, and we get to the cycling, and we're waiting, and whoosh, they all pass by. It was like 3 seconds. And we're like, yeah, high five, we've seen the Olympics, yeah! So we watched a couple other disciplines. And then, most notably, we watched the pentathlon. That's my ticket. I saved it from the Sydney Olympics. And I went down there and I bought this ticket to watch it because I thought I'm going to be not needing a ticket the next time that this event's held. And we watched the men's and the women's pentathlon. It culminated with the women, with the United States winning a silver medal, somewhat of a surprise silver medal by Emily DeReal. It was the first time women had ever been allowed to compete in the Olympics in our sport. It took until 2000. It's very surprising. It was only been recently that women had parity at the Olympics. So anyway, I came back from Sydney, and I was inspired. I said, I'm going to be in the next Olympics. This is going to be my dream coming true. I've done everything else I wanted to do. Went to the Air Force Academy. I'm ready to go. I got stationed at Schriever Air Force Base, east of town. It's way east of town, actually. And I put my life on hold to just train and work. So I'd get up at 4:30 in the morning. I'd swim. I'd go work my shift at Schriever. I'd get done. I'd go to the Olympic Training Center. I'd shoot. I'd go running afterwards. I'd be in bed by 9 o'clock at night. I had no social life. I did nothing else that year. I put my blinders on and I said, this is it. I will be in the Athens Olympics. And that year paid off. I became very good. I qualified for my first world team in 2001 and was starting to be taken quite seriously. I was accepted as a resident athlete at the Olympic Training Center here. The Olympic Training Center is the former Ent Air Force Base. In 1978, the Olympic Committee was founded, and the Air Force sold Ent to the Olympic Committee for $1. Since then, they've put over 9 figures of investment in there to build out the athletic venues, and it's now one of the top athletic facilities in the world. But I was given the opportunity to live there as a resident athlete. And this was a game changer for me because I shortened my commute to work, and I was living and eating where all the training facilities were. And I could just see my sport taking off like a rocket. And on September 11th, 2001, I walked into the dining hall at the Olympic Training Center, and I looked up and to the left, and I saw the TV monitor, and it said there's a plane that flew into the World Trade Center in New York. And I'm sort of scratching my head and looking at this. I'm like, that just looks weird when, bam, the second one hits. And, obviously that was a day that changed all of us. And I was standing there at the dining hall at the Olympic Training Center, and I thought, I don't know what this is going to mean. Called up my work, and they said, yeah, come on in. Everybody, no one knows what's going on, but come out here, check in, and you'll get further directions. Well, as it turned out, I was in space systems contracting. We're buying products for GPS and things like that. And so at a technical level, my unit was not highly affected by the immediate aftermath of 9/11. And I was a bit torn by it, but I knew that I wasn't going to be contributing in the war effort because I'm buying these 10-year-long systems. So after I reflected on it, I thought about it, and I put in my application to get into the Air Force's World-Class Athlete Program. And that's a program that allows service members to train for the Olympics. And I was accepted into that program that fall, and that gave me the ability to train full-time. And now everything's set up. I'm at the Olympic Training Center. I'm able to train full-time. Everything started clicking. By 2002, I was not only the #1 athlete in the U.S., I was the #1 by a lot. And I made my first final in a World Cup, which is a very big deal. I was finally starting to show I could compete at the international level. Great year. 2003 came along, and 2003 became a very pivotal year in my life. I started the year athletically doing very well, finished it very well too. But I've been over in Europe during the international turmoil that had happened while the U.S. was invading Iraq. And it was May of 2003 when I was back at the Olympic Training Center, and I got a call from my dad. And he said, Eli, turn on the TV. And I said, what's going on? He said, turn on the TV. Your uncle's about to be on TV. So I turned on the TV, and there's my uncle standing next to the president. And my president's announcing that my uncle's going to be taking over Iraq, which I'm like, okay, this is just weird. My uncle Jerry, my favorite uncle, is now being appointed by the President of the United States to go lead a very troubled part of the world. It also posed some interesting dynamics for me because I'm traveling all over the world, and we share the same last name. took about 3 minutes for the media to pick up on the fact that Ambassador Paul Bremer's nephew is Eli Bremer, the rising Olympic athlete. And so all of a sudden, our two stories at this point get interwoven together, which was it was a great experience, but it became part of who I would become as an Olympic athlete. You guys probably remember this. I can't see if this will actually play. It's a video. Nope, it won't play. Okay, that was the speech where my uncle announced that we caught Saddam Hussein. And so I was traveling around the world and competing and watching on TV stations all over the world, seeing my uncle. And my uncle at the time had the second highest bounty placed on his head of anyone in the world. Osama bin Laden offered a $25 million bounty to assassinate my uncle, number 2 behind the President of the United States. So it definitely impacted my career there, not in a bad way, not in a good way. It just became part of my story. I became known for that. 2003 was also the first year I made the finals of the World Championships. This is a photo. I'm sort of third from the right there in the blue. The guy right in front of me is Andrei Moiseev, who go on to win the gold medal. This was during the heat wave of Europe in 2003. It was 115 degrees that day. And we ran that race. We clipped in just over 9 minutes on a 3K. We were running about 420 miles for 2 miles in 115-degree heat. It was the hardest, considered the hardest semifinal ever. It was a very, very famous event. So that was my 2003. As 2003 progressed, I was communicating back and forth with my uncle, and there was a lot going on in Iraq at the time outside of what was reported on in the media. And after the U.S. invaded Iraq, this was not well known, but the International Olympic Committee, and they're somewhat of a dirty organization. They've been corrupt for years. There was just a thing where they found out about more bribes that took place in Rio this year. The IOC decertified the Iraqi Olympic team. And to put this in perspective, Saddam Hussein's sons had been running the Iraqi Olympic program. They were literally raping and abusing and torturing the Iraqi Olympic team, and the IOC turned a blind eye to it. When my uncle took over the country, he considered it a huge slap in the face when the IOC contacted him and said, because the U.S. invaded Iraq, we would tolerate torture, we will not tolerate what you're doing. So they decertified them. And my uncle took that personally, and he'd seen what had happened with me in the Olympics, and he decided that the Olympics are something that can bring a nation together. And Iraq's a complicated region. It's really not a historical country, and they've got lots of divides. You got Shia and Sunni religions, you got Kurdish ethnicities, and so it's really more of a post-World War II geographical construction. And one of the problems he was facing is, how do you bring a country together? And so the IOC took one of his major tools away from him. Well, he's a pretty determined guy. So he got on the horn with the IOC and said, this is important to me. I'm running Iraq, and I'm going to get Iraq into the Olympics. What are you going to require me to do to get Iraq into the Olympics? And they said, oh, it's going to be easy. All you have to do is hold free and democratic elections from the village level up and elect an entire democratically elected Iraqi Olympic Committee. You do that, and you're back in the Olympics. A country that in 4 decades had never held a free election. In the aftermath of a nasty war, they said you must hold free and democratic elections. That's what the IOC did. And my uncle said, you're on. So he started risking his life flying around to villages, and there were several purposes to this. One of the reasons was he believed that the Iraqis needed something positive to look forward, something that they could all rally around. But the other reason was because they'd never held free and democratic elections, it gave him a chance to do a dry run for future Iraqi political elections. So he and his security team were flying around setting up these elections starting in the summer of 2003. And so it's a little known fact, but the very first free elections that were held in Iraq in 4 decades were not the political ones, they were the Olympic Committee elections. And they pulled it off. And they got an entirely democratically elected certified election by the Iraqi Olympic Committee. And the IOC was just, they couldn't believe that he pulled it off. And they had egg on their face. They had no choice but to say, we're going to send the Iraqis to the Olympics. Okay, well, that's great, but you still have to qualify. So he had all these athletes training in Baghdad, which is non-conducive to Olympic sports. So one day my uncle called me up from Baghdad and said, Eli, I've got a bunch of athletes, judo and wrestling athletes, that are on the cusp of qualifying for the Olympics, but they can't train in Iraq. So I'm sending them out to Colorado Springs to train at the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs. When they get there, can you give them a welcome on my behalf? And I said, absolutely. Well, it was a couple weeks later, I'm walking through the training center here, and I see these Middle Eastern guys in uniforms. And I'm looking at it, and I realize it's Iraq. And so I walked up to them, and I introduced myself, and they gave me blank stares, and I realized they don't speak English. So through their translator, the translator said, this is Ambassador Bremer's nephew. They all broke down in tears, and they all jumped me and gave me bear hugs and were hugging and kissing me. And through the translator, they said, Eli, your uncle literally saved our lives. We were being tortured by Saddam Hussein's sons. He saved our lives, and we are so thrilled for the opportunity to be here. And I said, I've got a message from my uncle for you. And I said, my uncle asked that you take every advantage of this opportunity because you guys are leaders. You have the chance to inspire your nation. You have the chance to go back and show your people that there's a way you can rally together around something positive. And athletes make great leaders. And it was a very emotional meeting that day. And they stuck around for a couple months and trained, and a number of Iraqi athletes, in fact, did qualify for the Olympics in 2004. That's a photo taken in April of 2002 in a soccer stadium. I believe it was in the outskirts of Baghdad. They had to launch a whole new Olympic committee. That's the new logo. My uncle was there. I couldn't get a photo of it, but my uncle was there that day launching the Iraqi Olympic team. Well, 3 days before this photo was taken, I was running in Colorado Springs getting ready for Olympic trials, which are a series of international competitions. And I was running in Palmer Park, which is right downtown, and I stepped on a rock and I broke my foot. I actually heard it snap. And once I discovered it was broken, it was over. There's nothing you can do. You can't tough your way out of a broken foot when you use your legs like you have to in my sport. And I was devastated, absolutely devastated. I was humiliated. I was embarrassed. And you get weird emotions as an athlete when you're going through this. And in the aftermath of sort of collecting myself, I went and started swimming just to rehab my foot because I could take weight off of it and just rehab. And I started swimming with Rowdy Gaines. Now, some of you may know that name. Rowdy's a triple Olympic gold medalist from 1984. But you probably know him more now because if you've watched Michael Phelps win any of his 85 medals, or whatever the number is now, Rowdy has been the commentator for that. So Rowdy was swimming at the Olympic Training Center, and one day after swimming, we were swimming together over lunch, and he said, hey, Eli, NBC has asked me to do the commentary for pentathlon, and I don't really know anything about it. Would you help me get ready for it? And I said, yeah, absolutely. To me, TV and the Olympics are intertwined because that's how almost everybody gets to see the Olympics. So a couple days later, we're showering off again after swimming. He's like, I got another idea. Would you like to be the commentator for NBC for the pentathlon? Because I think you'd do a better job at it than I would. I mean, that'd be like Michael Phelps saying, I think you'd be a better swimmer than I. I mean, Rowdy's like the commentator. Yes, Rowdy, yes, I would love to. So he's like, great, I'm gonna go check with NBC. A couple days later, yeah, NBC's not buying it. He's like, they reminded me the Olympics are not for rookies. I'm like, yeah, okay, that figures. He said, but when I told them who you were and that you're well connected, you do a sport and you know a lot of other sports, they'd like to see if you want to come out and work for them as like a researcher and a statistician and help do broadcast production. It's been a few weeks now since I've realized I'm not going to the Olympics myself, so this thing's starting to wear off. And I said, yeah, I'd like to do that. This would be cool. I'd like to participate. So one thing led to another, and NBC offered me a job to come out and help produce the Olympics. To me, it was a great opportunity. I was, again, ecstatic to be a part of the Olympics. I've been dreaming about the Olympics for 22 years at this point, and you know what? If I couldn't compete, helping with the NBC production was going to be the next best thing. So 2 weeks before the Olympics, I got on a flight, went out, and I started working like the second I hit the ground in Athens. I went out there and was just like ready to go. And For 2 weeks straight, I'd show up early. I was working at the International Broadcast Center, which is this massive warehouse. And I had no idea the scope of the NBC operations. To put this in perspective, NBC is the largest financial contributor to the Olympics globally. NBC is. Dick Ebersol in the late 1990s made a huge bet, spent billions and billions of dollars investing in the Olympics. And so because of that, NBC is also the largest operation at the Olympics. So the U.S. Olympic Committee sent about 100 people over. We had more people in our driving motor pool for NBC than the U.S. Olympic Committee had there. Rented out multiple hotels, just massive operation. And I got there, and I'm like, oh my gosh. But it was like going to Disney after watching a bunch of animated films as a kid, and you're like, this is where Simba lives. This is where the Olympics are produced on TV. It was just, I'm serious. There's Bob Costas, Matt Lauer, Bob Costas. I just did everything I could because I wanted to be a part of it. The morning of opening ceremonies, I came in early because I knew it was going to be a busy day, but it was also going to kind of shut down as opening ceremonies came on. So I showed up really early to get everything done I needed to. And my plan was I was going to go back to my hotel room. It was about 6 miles away, and I was going to watch opening ceremonies on TV and then go up to the rooftop and see if I could see the fireworks. I thought that'll be pretty cool. Well, partway through the morning, my boss there came to me and said, Eli, would you be interested in helping out with production of opening ceremonies this evening? And I said, yes. And he said, okay, great. Here's the deal. I'm going to give you an all-black outfit. It's a uniform for opening ceremonies. And go back, shower, change. It's going to be a really late night. Maybe get a nap. Come back after lunch, and we'll get you set up to work opening ceremonies. I thought, this is a cool opportunity. I'm going to be there in the building with Bob Costas, like literally working down, a couple doors down from Bob, helping produce opening ceremonies. It's a cool gig. Not as good as competing in the Olympics, but cool nonetheless. So I go back, get showered, get napped, put on my black outfit, which I thought was weird because I thought it was some weird television deal. Like, I don't know, maybe you wear all black on important days. So I go back and they have the pre-opening ceremonies production meeting. And I walk in there, and I'm the only non-professional TV person. I have no idea what the terms are or anything. And I'm just trying to hide like how utterly naive I am and keep my mouth shut so they don't fire me. So in the production meeting, they're going around and they're like, okay, here's your job, here's your job. They get to me and they say, okay, they hand me a folder and they say, you're a spotter and so on. So I'm looking around, I'm like, okay, who else is a spotter? So I found another spotter. I'm like, what's a spotter do? Like, do we tag equipment? Like, what are we doing? He's like, no. We if you open your book, there's a list of athletes there that they want to tell stories about, and we're supposed to be directing the camera crew on which athletes. So we help spot and ID athletes. And I'm like, okay, so technically what does that mean? He's like, well, you're going to be assigned to a camera. NBC's got cameras all around the stadium. And you're going to be in one of those cameras. We're usually up in the balcony area, and you're going to be looking with binoculars, and you're going to point out to the cameramen, hey, look, there's Michael Phelps, or there's Roland Gardner. Like, so your job would be out there doing that. I'm like, I get to go watch opening ceremonies from the stadium? He's like, yeah, we get to do that. I'm like, whoa! So this gal comes over and introduces herself. She says, Eli, I'm Andrea Joyce. Andrea is one of the top color commentators for NBC. And she said, you're going to be working with me today. I'm like, cool. So she said, let's go over to opening ceremonies. So it's hours before the start. We start walking over there. We've got our special credentials on, and we have all access passes, but we have wristbands also. And she's, Andrea can see, I'm like a little kid on Christmas. I'm like 10 little kids on Christmas. I'm like, this is super cool. I'm going to watch opening ceremonies. Yay. So we're walking over there, and it's just, the excitement's building. And we get there, and the stadium's empty. Totally, utterly empty. Just save for a few hundred people that are, getting ready for the event to start. And they hadn't let any of the crowds in. We're that early. So we walk down we just walk right into the front, and I'm like, working for NBC has its perks. And Andrea gets down, and she's like, hey, Eli, you want to go walk around the track? No, I don't. So we flip our credentials up, and the security guard's like, oh, you work for NBC. Well, you can do whatever you want. So we walk onto the track, and we're walking around there, and this was the view from the track of the opening ceremonies of the Olympics. And, the sun's starting to set, and you can see people starting to come in. And I'm just like, this is so surreal. Just standing there and waiting for the opening ceremonies to start. And I was a little burned because I did want to have been an athlete there, but this was pretty special to be able to actually be standing on the opening ceremonies of the Olympics of 2004. So Andrea and I sort of get caught up joking around and talking, and we see the crowds fill up, and we're not really paying attention at the time when all of a sudden we hear this boom, boom, and I'm like, whoa, what was that? And Andrea looks at me and goes, oh, shoot, Eli, I think opening ceremonies just started. I'm like, what? She's like, we're standing on the inside of the track when the opening ceremonies of the 2004 Olympics started. So let me see if I can actually play this one, because this one's kind of a fun little video. So we jump inside a speaker box. I'm not even kidding. That's the only thing we could find. If I can get the video to play here. This was a video I took. I guess we can't get it from inside the speaker box. I'll explain where we are here. So we were scared to death. I was like, we are going to be making national news, because here we have NBC broadcasters palling around in the middle of the opening ceremonies field. So this is the actual track of the Olympics. We jump back into it, and the performers are coming out all around us, and we had nowhere to hide, so we literally jumped underneath the speaker box and watched as all the performers came out. That's me and Andrea Joyce and Melissa Stark sitting inside our speaker box for about the first 10 minutes, terrified that the security was going to come find us and kick us out, and that we'd become the story of the Olympics. But as it turned out, we were totally fine. And Andrea explained to me that we were actually okay because we were what's called the field of play crew. And so she said, well, we're not really supposed to be on the field right now. We're supposed to be sitting in the front of the, we were supposed to be sitting over there where the media is, but no one said anything. So we jumped on top of the speaker box and we just sat there and watched opening ceremony. It was a really good view. So that was a very exciting time. I remember thinking during the opening ceremonies, I've been at this for 22 years is when my Olympic dream was born, and maybe this is all my dream will wind up being, and maybe that's okay. To be able to say that the culmination of your Olympic career ended with you sitting on the field of the opening ceremonies, working for NBC, one of the great production organizations for sports, with the top broadcasters in the world, if that's where my story ends, I'm glad I pursued it. And I was actually content there, and I had a really good time. And a couple things happened. I was sitting there watching this. Greece walks onto the field, and they get a standing ovation because they're the founders of the Olympics. Everybody celebrates them. The United States walked onto the field, and that was a little bittersweet because I knew so many people there, and they get a standing ovation. But the one that really moved me was when Iraq walked onto the field, and they got a standing ovation. Now, incidentally, if you look back into the left, those are the speaker boxes where we're sitting in this photo. So that's right where we were. We had to sort of back out. We'd started in this area here and then moved backwards. But when Iraq walked onto the field of the Olympics, the world came to their feet. And it was moving to me to know the background, and my uncle had literally risked his life for this to happen. They became one of the best stories of the Olympics. They nearly won a medal in men's soccer, you might remember. And that became a big story of Iraq coming together and people coming together in peace and celebrating something that's super productive despite all that was going on in the world. Well, something changed over the next week or so. Rowdy kept on campaigning for me to take over for him in the pentathlon. And I got some training from Bill Clement, who's a very famous hockey play-by-play caller. And I was allowed to audition with the same gal who had turned me down before, Molly Solomon, the head of NBC Olympics. Molly saw my audition tape and said, you know what, Rowdy, you can go home. That's fine. We'll hire Eli. So I was picked up to be the second youngest broadcaster at the Athens Olympics. So there I was, an NBC broadcaster all of a sudden. Second youngest Olympic broadcaster. And then for closing ceremonies, Andrea asked me to come work with her again, and I got to be on the field for closing ceremonies. And what this is at the end of the Summer Olympics, they hand off the Olympic flag to the next city that's going to host the Olympics. And so that was going to be Beijing. And at opening ceremonies, I thought maybe this is the end of my Olympic career. But when I saw that flag being handed off, I was standing there watching this. I remember right here, these are Team USA athletes right here in front of us. And I remember thinking, I'm going to go to Beijing. I can do this. And at the close of the ceremonies, I got this photo with Andrea. And I said, Andrea, it's been fun working with you, but next time I'm going to cancel. I'm going on as an athlete. So that was how I left the Athens Olympics, and it had really a profound impact on me. And the next couple years were great for me athletically. 2005 and 6 were my breakout years. I got ranked number 2 in the world. Everything finally started coming together. And in 2007, they held the Pan American Games. I'd won Pan Am Championships twice. In Rio de Janeiro, I was definitely coming in as a top-ranked athlete. Everybody knew I had a good chance. The reason why Pan Am Games are important is you qualify internationally, not domestically, meaning the U.S. doesn't get any spots. You got to go earn it internationally. And I stood on the line at the start of that competition, and I'll tell you, I was as nervous as I've ever been. I'm one of the best athletes in the world, but this is the day. And I'm either going to punch my ticket and I'm going to be an Olympian at the end of the day, or I've got to go try to qualify through another means, but I need to get this slot. I was the most nervous I'd ever been. About 5-6 shots in, I had a terrible shot, sat down, was like, okay, I can recover from this. Got into fencing and started winning, and I just never really stopped. And then I got into swimming, and I'm the fastest swimmer out there. In fact, at the time, I was the second fastest run swimmer in the world. So I picked up a whole mitt full of points there. Got on the horse, and I thought, I remember, I thought I was going to vomit. I was so nervous when I got on that horse, because I thought, this is the only thing that can prevent me from going to the Olympics right now. And 70 seconds later, I left the ring. I had only 2 minor penalties, which meant I was going to start running in first place. And I had about 45 seconds I could put on the next fastest person at the competition. So running was a great sport for me. I was running national caliber times in pentathlons. And I'd always, prior to this, been known as a workhorse. And I would compete as hard as anyone, no matter how far ahead or behind I was. But this was going to be different, because on the one hand, I knew the only thing that would keep me out of the Olympics that day would be a cramp or something like that, so I needed to be careful. But the other thing was, I thought, I think I can enjoy this for the first time. And I remember being in Rio that day and bending down to tie my shoes and thinking about all the people that had made sacrifices to help get me there. From my parents, who had spent all this money and all this time, and my wife, who had endured like years of us not having friends, and friends who had endured us despite the fact that we were really lousy friends, and all these people, Alan and Camerata, the people that had introduced me to this. And I thought, I'm just gonna enjoy this, and I'm gonna take them with me. And so for the first time, I actually just kind of cruised. It was a fairly fast cruising. We were going about 4:30 mile pace, but I just cruised. And I wish I had the video, because this is actually video of the running. And I'll never forget rounding that last corner in Rio in the stadium there and looking at that ribbon. There's no one close to me. And I just slowed down to a jog, and I snagged the ribbon and I held it up. And on the 24th of July, 2007, I punched my ticket to the Olympics. 25 years in the making. And it was the greatest day of my life. Unfortunately, the video is not working here. I've got a video of getting awarded the medal at the Pan Am Games. A blowout victory, got to stand at the top of the podium, got to see the flag get raised. And that was the day that I became an Olympian. In fact, I called up my parents. My wife was at work, so I was text messaging her, but I called my parents from the competition. I said, Mom and Dad, I'm an Olympian. And just an amazing experience to be able to justify a career, to be able to take all those people with me. This is the World Championships. I'm running into the finals again with Andre Moiseev, the reigning gold medalist. And I actually the reason I put emphasis where I did was the Olympics were a different type of event for me. On August 4th, 2008, I got on the airplane here in Colorado Springs again, same place I'd met the first Olympian, and I felt like I was ready to go. This is August 8th. I walked into the opening ceremonies of the 2008 Olympics. Right before this picture was taken, I'd run into Andrea Joyce in the gymnastics center. She walked up and looked at me and said, "Oh my gosh, Eli, you made it." And this was such a great experience here. But The day after this photo was taken, I got on a flight to a training camp in Singapore. We had about 2 weeks between this and when we competed, which is at the end. And 3 days after that, I was in the hospital with a severe neck injury. So I was immobilized, I had a severe spinal injury, and they wouldn't even treat me in Singapore. So I had to get back on an airplane, immobilized, and fly back up to the Olympics to find some American doctors who'd work on me. It was 3 days before my competition that I came out of the neck brace, and they said, we're going to allow you to compete. And I was scared to death at this point. I come in wanting to win a medal. In 3 days, 72 hours before I competed, I just wanted to be able to compete because there's a problem. Technically, you're not an Olympian until you actually start at the Olympics. And that was on the line. So my Olympics were interesting and disappointing. I finished 22nd place, but I had some great moments in there. My favorite photo of swimming at the Olympics, this was taken underwater by a military photographer who was out to document it. The show jumping in front of 35,000 people. There was 6 inches of mud that day. It was, I've got some great photos of the mud just spraying out from the horse's legs. Those are 4-foot jumps of 4-foot spreads. And the running is soaking rain. And I like this photo because the gentleman behind me is Ilya Frolov. He was the reigning world champion. I trained all year to beat Ilya at this competition. We were the 2 fastest run swimmers in the world at the time. I was the fastest non-doping athlete, as we found out later. We were expected to be battling it out for a medal this day. And instead, both of us had pretty disastrous days, and so we both finished in the 20s. But it was after this competition, it was raining, was very disappointed, and I walked up, I waited about 20 minutes to walk up to see my parents and my friends who come out and watched. And I got caught by all these Chinese people who were there to watch the competition. And I was, quite frankly, so embarrassed by how bad the competition had gone. And I hadn't told anybody. My wife knew I was injured. My family had no idea. So very few people knew. I was trying to hide it because I didn't want them to be worried. But anyway, I got stuck for probably 10, 15 minutes taking photos with all these Chinese that bought tickets. And this was so special to them. They were hosting it. And that day, the Russian, Andrei Moiseev, had won. And second place was, second and third were these Lithuanian athletes. And my coach was a Lithuanian, and he had coached them before. So he was sitting with my family. And I was so disappointed. I was so unhappy and embarrassed and all these emotions. And as I said, the only reason, quite frankly, I took the photos is I just didn't want to face my family. So after I got done taking the photos, I went down, talked to my family. We set up dinner plans for the night. And my wife told me afterwards that my coach, who had coached the silver and bronze medalists, had turned to my family and said, you know, none of these people here are going to remember who won the medals today, but they're going to remember the guy who took photos with them. And that was a tough pill for me to swallow. It's tough for me even today to remember that day. But it also taught me one of my greatest lessons in sports, in the lessons that I took away from sports. And so the 3 things that I'll share with you, well, I'll sum up the rest of my career. I did 4 more world teams, wound up getting very sick in 2012, so didn't qualify, but I've worked for NBC twice since then, become an NBC broadcaster, and chalked up one of the most successful careers of a U.S. athlete. Just had been very blessed to be in the Olympics for so long. But the 3 lessons that I sort of learned that I want to share with you that I learned from the Olympics are number 1, dreams mean something. Oftentimes we're told, don't dream. And you know what? If my dream, if I'd given it up early, I wouldn't have been able to do these great things. And I talked so much more about my experience in Athens, and that's because I understood at that point, even if I had failed to make my dream, I could have stopped my Olympic career in Athens and been super happy with everything I'd done in sports. But to me, dreams absolutely matter, and they mean something. Second one is outlasting is a viable strategy. I was a 4-year-old little chubby kid when I first started thinking about the Olympics. I was 30 years old when I competed for the Olympics. I was 34 when I retired after making my 12th world team. So don't ever think that just because you're not good at something when you start, that you can't be the best at it down the road. A lot of people look at successful athletes and they look at successful people and they think, my gosh, they must have just been naturally talented. I had anti-talent, but I outlasted people, and that's a viable strategy. And then the third thing is, it's important the impact you have on other people. I share with you the story of being at the Olympics and having those Chinese, my coach was probably right. They probably do remember, and they probably still have that picture with the Olympian. My uncle and the impact he had on the Iraqi team. To me, the impact you have on other people is more important than anything else. And that's true in sports. It's also true in business. That's something I've tried to take into my business life. Anything I do in business, I want to try to make it something that other people are enriched and edified by, because I think that's really what we need to do to leave an impact. So anyway, thank you for your time today. And I want to thank you for coming and visiting Olympic City, USA. I hope this gives you a behind-the-scenes view of an athlete, and that in 2 months, the opening ceremonies, I believe, are 2 months from today. When you're watching that, every athlete there has a story. I've worked with over 100 Olympians now, and they all have these stories. And almost every athlete I know was not, I showed up and I was just amazing from the get-go. They've all got these stories and these struggles to get here. So hopefully when you're watching the Olympics in a couple months, you'll be able to dig in and see some of those stories and appreciate also Colorado's place in being the home of the U.S. Olympic movement, which is one of the great movements in the world today. So thank you for your time, and enjoy the rest of your time here in Colorado Springs. Sure. You want to? Yeah.
Maybe take some questions.
Yeah, I got time for questions. I'll put this back in if we got, yeah.
Why don't you keep the mic on? Let me
Okay.
play with this.
I'll show you.